We bid you welcome, who come with weary spirits seeking rest, who come with troubles that are too much with you, who come hurt and afraid. We bid you welcome, who come with hope in your heart, proud and joyous. We bid you welcome, who are seekers of a new faith, who come to probe and explore and to learn. We bid you welcome, who enter this hall as a homecoming. Whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are in your journey, we bid you welcome.
Good morning. As we light our chalice this morning, as we light our chalice this morning to honor notable UU women in history, allow me to quote from a very famous Unitarian, Louisa May Alcott. "Far away there in the sunshine are my highest aspirations. I may not reach them, but I can look up and see their beauty, believe in them, and try to follow where they lead." May this chalice symbolize the light we all take on our own aspirational journeys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
That sounded good. Welcome to Eastrose Fellowship Unitarian Universalist. I am Carol Knox, your worship leader for today, and this is Gloria Holland, and it is Holland instead of, it was Hopkins up there at Holland. She's our speaker for today. She spoke to us earlier this year of spirituality. You might remember that. Today, she's speaking of notable UU women in history. She is retired from the Salem Kaiser School District after a 30-year career teaching English, and she has been active with Pinnacle Theater and is currently involved with American Association of University Women. So let's all take a moment now to greet each other, and so stand and first turn to the camera by the clock up there and wave at the people online. Bye, and then continue to visit for a while, for a minute. It's good to see you here. Please take a moment to offer respect and appreciation to the indigenous peoples whose traditional homelands and hunting grounds are right here where we gather each Sunday. In remembering these communities, we honor the legacy, their lives, and their descendants. And so, please stand as you are able and join me in singing our opening hymn 346, Come Sing a Song With Me. You'll find it in the gray hymnal. The words will be up there also. But I feel that we all sound better when we're reading the notes. Okay. a story for all ages, and our family minister is going to come up and lead the children.
Okay, thank you guys for being here. So our story today is called Olympia Brown, A Voice and a Vote. And this is a story about a real person. She was born in 1835. She was a minister and a suffragist. A suffragist is somebody who works to give more people the right to vote, in this case including women. So if you look at the screen, you'll see pictures of the real Olympia Brown. When Olympia Brown was little, girls weren't supposed to whistle. Girls weren't supposed to climb trees or run fast or catch frogs. But Olympia did. She did all those things and more. You can do whatever a boy can do, her mother and her father told her, and Olympia knew it was true. She climbed trees and ran fast and caught frogs. And when she was in school, she answered the teacher's questions loud and clear. Little girls ought to be quiet, said one lady in town. Little girls ought not to make themselves heard. But Olympia did. She had a voice, and she was going to use it every day. When Olympia Brown was a teenager, young women weren't supposed to go to college. Young women weren't supposed to leave home to go off and learn complicated things. But Olympia did. She did all those things and more. Olympia left home and went to Antioch College. She went to class and studied and learned all kinds of complicated things. Young women ought not to be in college, said one professor at that school. But since they are here, they must read their reports. Young women ought not to give speeches from memory like the men. But Olympia did. When it was her turn to present her report, she rolled up the papers in her hand and said every word loud and clear. Olympia Brown had a voice, and she was going to use it every day. When Olympia Brown was in college, women weren't supposed to wear pants. Women weren't supposed to wear anything except very long dresses that came all the way down to the tips of their toes. But Olympia did. She wore dresses that came down only past her knees, and under them she dared to wear pants. Bloomers, the pants were called, after Amelia Bloomer, the woman who had created them a few years before. Women ought not to show their ankles in public, exclaimed some of the men, and women certainly ought not to wear pants. But Olympia did. She wore her bloomers every day, no matter how much men sneered. When Olympia Brown was finished with college, women weren't supposed to be ministers. Women never stood in front of a congregation and talked about God. But Olympia did. She did all those things and more. Olympia graduated from the theological school at St. Lawrence University in 1863 and was ordained as a Universalist minister in June of that year, the second woman ever to be officially ordained by that church. She became the Reverend Olympia Brown. Women ought not to speak in public, said a minister at that time. Women ought not to take the pulpit or discuss the nature of God. But the Reverend Olympia Brown did. During the next 35 years, she was a minister in 5 different congregations, and she visited other congregations too. She took the pulpit in every single one, and she spoke on the nature of God and love, and she did an excellent job. Olympia Brown had a voice, and she used it every day. When Olympia Brown was born, women weren't allowed to vote. Women weren't allowed to have any say in who was elected president or senator or mayor of the town. But Olympia had something to say about that. Olympia had a lot to say about that. She traveled all over the state of Kansas in a horse and buggy, giving speeches to convince people that women deserved the right to vote. She wrote hundreds of letters She spoke to the representatives and senators in Congress. She marched in parades. Olympia and her friends worked hard to get women the right to vote. Excuse me. Olympia Brown had a voice, and she used it every day for over 50 years. And finally, when Olympia Brown was old, women were allowed to vote. In November of 1920, when Olympia was 85 years old, she voted for the very first time. Olympia had always had a voice, and she had used it to make sure that she and all the other women in the United States had a vote as well. So we're going to take the children back to the classroom area for RE, while the people along the center aisle will join hands. We will sing them out.
May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Here at Eastrose, we share half of our offering with a nonprofit organization. This quarter, it is Outgrowing Hunger, which builds and operates community farms and gardens for refugees, immigrants, and people who care about affordable access to, I like this, real food in Portland and Gresham. First-time visitors, you are our guests. Please let the basket pass by. Your presence here today is your gift to us. If you have any announcements, please put them in the basket for me to read later. If you're attending online, you may donate by visiting our website and clicking the donate button, or you can scan the code on the screen. Let us now share what gifts we are able for support of the fellowship. Oh. And now we'll sing Spirit of Life, and you may remain seated for that, and you can find it in this great, I call it black, but anyway, hymnal, and 1, 2, 3. And of course the word will be up there also.
Superman,
Pete Seeger,
Rod Sterling,
Frank Lloyd Wright,
Linus Pauling,
Charles Dickens,
P.T. Barnum,
D.E. Cummings,
Ralph Waldo Emerson.
and yes, Christopher Reeve, also known as Superman.
Thank you, Carol.
All politics.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sorry, I should have taken that before.
Just great. The story that was read this morning was certainly a fabulous introduction to what I'm going to be presenting today. And what we just read were just a few of the very famous men in American history who were either born into or became Unitarians or Universalists. Now, I originally wrote this talk for Women's History Month, which is in March, but I believe that women should be celebrated every month. So we will let the men take their bow while we explore the successes of a few women in history. Now, at the end of this service, I will share with you a list of the women I'm about to talk about. So you don't need to take notes, which is something I have been known to do at UU services. When I was a child growing up on farms here in the Willamette Valley, my family adhered to the precepts of Christian Science. My grandmother earned her living as a very well-regarded Christian Science practitioner, a healer who prayed for a better understanding of God's universe, and people looked to her to heal their physical and emotional wounds. So I grew up hearing and learning about the woman who in 1879 founded the first Church of Christ Scientists, otherwise known as Christian Science. Her name was Mary Baker Eddy, and she was an icon of truth in my childhood home. While I most certainly no longer subscribe to the tenets of Christian Science, it never occurred to me when I was growing up that there might be other women out there who contributed to the welfare and benefit of our country and even of our daily lives. I think at this point it should be noted that much of the mid-1800s in this country saw great chaos and change. This was a time of increased interest in science, in women's rights and suffrage, in social justice and abolition, and in philosophy and religion. This was a time when many women, and many Unitarian and Universalist women in particular, brought changes so profound that their work changed the direction of our country. For centuries, however, as was explained in our wonderful story here, for centuries, women were considered too delicate, too uneducated, too ignorant, too domestic to be allowed into many public arenas. Women of the time, as we heard, were not even allowed to speak in public to a mixed group of women and men. According to Jackson Spielvogel, Associate Professor Emeritus of History at Pennsylvania State University, and I quote, "Male scientists used the new science to spread the view that women were, by nature, inferior and subordinate to men, and suited to play a domestic role as nurturing mothers." Some of the notable women we all read nothing about in our history books, and who were also drawn to Unitarian or Universalist thinking, have only recently come to my attention. Let's start with Elizabeth Blackwell. Blackwell's family moved to the United States in about 1822 when Elizabeth was an infant. Coming from an activist family, it's really no surprise that Elizabeth would seek a profession and a religion that gave her opportunities to help people beyond the teaching career that was expected of her. Although she applied to numerous medical schools in New York and New England, she was rejected by them all, being told in no uncertain terms that she was intellectually inferior to men and would simply never make it. Well, finally, she was accepted to Geneva College in New York. It soon became apparent that her acceptance was meant as a joke. During certain lessons on reproduction, she was asked to listen from the hall and denied access to labs because it was said she, as a woman, was too delicate to see such things. In 1849, Elizabeth Blackwell graduated #1 in her medical school class and became the first female doctor in the United States. Yes, yay! She was followed shortly after by her sister Emily Blackwell, who became the second female doctor in the United States. Shortly after graduating from medical school, Elizabeth lost the sight in one eye. But she and Emily continued their mission to provide medical services, especially to women. Over the years, the sisters established numerous infirmaries and medical schools for women. Elizabeth was interested in many reform movements, mainly moral reform, sexual purity, hygiene, and education regarding preventative medicine, sanitation, family planning, women's rights, and medical ethics. While we now know that some of her ideas were unfounded, such as her notion that disease came from moral impurity and not from microbes, Unitarian Elizabeth Blackwell led the way for other women of her time to seek out medicine as a profession. A number of new religions came into being in the mid-1800s. Among them, the Seventh-day Adventists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Science, and the Latter-day Saints, or Mormons. The philosophical rumblings of transcendentalism got the attention of many thinkers and social activists. Among them, of course, were the Transcendentalists and Unitarians, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. While the Unitarian movement got its start in Transylvania, Romania, and in Poland in the 1500s, both Unitarians and Universalists were alive and well in the United States in the 1800s, alongside of the previous mentioned new religious movements. With William Ellery Channing's influence and leadership, the Unitarian movement expanded and welcomed many men and women who believed strongly in social activism. Consider Dorothea Dix, who became a Unitarian after hearing William Ellery Channing preach. Dix would go on to investigate the dismal conditions in the Pennsylvania women's prison system. Her advocacy for the inmates and the mentally ill was founded in the belief that all people, even the most ill and criminal element, should be treated with dignity and respect. And her work led to major reforms in the care and treatment of incarcerated women. And then there's Florence Nightingale, a British Unitarian who, after seeing the horrific conditions suffered by the injured soldiers in the Crimean War, Florence Nightingale went on to change the face of the nursing profession. She changed the entire profession. And among other successes, Nightingale founded the first scientifically based nursing school in London in 1860. Back in the United States, Clara Barton, who was born into a Universalist family, became intrigued by the International Red Cross, which had been established by the Geneva Convention. Who knew? I didn't know that. In 1881, Barton established the American Red Cross and served as president until 1904. Mary Livermore, we haven't heard much of Mary Livermore, but she served as a nurse during the Civil War. Mary Livermore went on to write volumes and to become a national lecturer on the subject of civic justice, and women's rights. Mary Livermore is quoted as saying, "For humanity has moved forward to an era when wrong and slavery are being displaced and reason and justice are being recognized as the rule of life." Jane Addams, creator of Hull House in Chicago, worked on legislation to create juvenile courts, limit working hours for women, and require school attendance. Addams was the founding member of the American Civil Liberties Union, and she was the first woman in the United States to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Two Universalists who changed the role of women in America were Judith Sargent Murray and Olympia Brown. In the 1780s, this is like over 240 years ago, Judith Sargent Murray, a staunch feminist, advocated for women's rights, especially to become ministers, opening the door for women to take leadership roles in the Universalist Church. Judith Sargent Murray, one of the founders of the American Universalist Church, wrote, among other things, the essay on the equality of the sexes, which is looked to even today by progressive-minded activists. In her essay, Murray states, "Our souls are by nature equal to yours. The same breath of God animates, enlivens, and invigorates us, and that we are not fallen lower than yourselves." Also, an ardent suffragist, Olympia Brown, who we heard about this morning, became apparently the second woman in the United States to be ordained into the ministry. And this was by the National Universalist denomination. This was in 1863. Olympia Brown opened the door for women across America to take leadership roles in many American churches. I think most of us are somewhat aware that the women's suffrage movement began at the Seneca Falls Convention in New York in 1848 and ended in 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. Now, the word suffrage, as was pointed out earlier, does not mean to suffer. A lot of people think that. But rather, suffrage means the right to vote. The struggle to get women the right to vote took 72 years and the dedication of tens of thousands of American women. And we refer to this right to vote struggle as the suffrage movement. Elizabeth Cady Stanton changed the course of American history when she delivered her Declaration of Sentiments speech at the Seneca Falls Convention, laying the foundation for the suffrage movement to follow. Now, while Stanton did not identify specifically as Unitarian, she worked and lived closely with others whose names you may recognize. Unitarian Susan B. Anthony, yes, became the face of the early suffrage movement as she and Stanton worked tirelessly as a team, and they lived together and worked together as a team to spread the message of women's rights across the land. Both Anthony and Stanton worked with our own Abigail Scott Duniway, who devoted over 40 years to the cause of women's rights, much of that time spent right here in the Willamette Valley. And I want to say that Abigail Scott Duniway lived first in McMinnville, she lived in Salem, she lived in Albany, and then she came to Portland, she went to Idaho, and then she came back. Two of her great-granddaughters are members of the UU congregation of Salem, where I attend, and our congregation is really proud of that and proud of Abigail Scott Duniway. Many of the women in the suffrage movement also became noted for their work in other fields of social justice. Lucy Stone, outspoken suffragist, abolitionist, feminist, and Unitarian, became known as the first woman to keep her own name after getting married. And what a scandal that was. After the 72-year struggle to gain suffrage, Carrie Chapman Catt, who was a Unitarian, spoke successfully before the United States Congress, and that's the House and the Senate, which was a body, a combined body, that contained or included one woman. One woman. Carrie Chapman Catt pleaded with Congress to honor women with the passage of the amendment that would finally codify women's suffrage. Catt had served as the National American Women's Suffrage Association president, and that organization turned into the League of Women Voters, which Unitarian Carrie Chapman Catt founded. During the Civil War, Unitarian Julia Ward Howe, a fairly well-known poet, feminist, and anti-slavery activist, was asked to write a poem or a song that could be sung to the tune of John Brown's Body. The words to the Battle Hymn of the Republic came to her in the middle of the night with the lyrics simply swimming in her head. Her song became immediately popular among the Union troops and is sung often to this day. Later in 1870, with the scourge of the Civil War still being felt, Julia Ward Howe wrote and delivered a proclamation for a Mother's Peace Day, which read in part, "Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs." In 1914, President Woodrow Wilson officially recognized Mother's Day as a national holiday. And of course, we must not forget Unitarian Louisa May Alcott, who gave us Little Women. I have never heard the name Maria Mitchell until I began doing research for this presentation. Maria Mitchell was a naturalist, an educator. She taught at Vassar College, and she was an astronomer. In 1847, she discovered a comet that became known as Miss Mitchell's Comet. I kind of like that. After which she became internationally renowned for her work in astronomy. Another American astronomer who lived in the 20th century was Unitarian Cecilia Payne. Now, I don't know how one does this, but she discovered that stars are made mainly of hydrogen and helium, and established that stars can be classified according to their temperature. And I don't know how you take the temperature of a star, but there you go. And since I'm not a scientist, this information, all of this information is really way over my head. But I find it unfortunate that Cecilia Payne and Maria Mitchell are not household names. Another Unitarian whose name some of you may remember is Captain Dr. Laurel Clark. Dr. Laurel Clark was the U.S. naval officer and astronaut who perished in the 2003 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. As a young girl coming up on the farm, I remember well watching my mother put together many meals, including desserts made from scratch and cinnamon rolls made from memory. Often my mom would throw in a pinch of salt, a bit of butter, or a splash of milk. This technique in measurement was standard practice in most kitchens when my mom was learning how to cook from her mother. However, in the late 1800s, a Unitarian named Fanny Farmer, don't you love that name, Fanny Farmer? Fanny Farmer published cookbooks that introduced American cooks to the science of cooking, including the use of standardized measurements like cups and half cups and teaspoons and tablespoons and so forth. Fanny Farmer wrote extensively about the necessity for a sanitary working space, the importance of good, balanced nutrition, and tips for good housekeeping and safe canning and drying of fruits and veggies. Fanny Farmer's later cookbooks contained over 30 pages on preparing food for diabetics. And this was back in the late 1800s, so pretty cool. After gaining a reputation that some might say would equal Julia Child's, excuse me, Fanny Farmer, who had not completed high school due to illness, would go on to lecture at Harvard Medical School. And she taught doctors and nurses the scientific importance of preparing nutritious, appealing meals for the sick and convalescing. It's been well over 100 years since Fanny Farmer's cookbooks were first published, and they're still available today. Social activism has been a foundation of the Unitarian faith for centuries, and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper epitomizes such concrete work. Born free in 1825, Harper was the first African-American woman to be a published author in the United States. Called the mother of African-American journalism, this very active Unitarian fought through her writings for abolition, prohibition, and suffrage. Another African-American Unitarian, Fannie Barrier Williams, was a suffragist and one of the founders of the NAACP. The Black activist Margaret Moseley served on the board of the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts and was a leader in the anti-McCarthyism movement of the 1950s, some time ago. I think it's the smoke, I really do. Many of us recognize the name Reverend James Reeb, the white Unitarian minister from Boston, who walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Reverend Reeb, along with two other activist men, were leaving a restaurant after dinner when they were attacked by a group of white supremacists. Unitarian Reverend Reeb was killed and his attackers were set free. A few days later, Viola Liuzzo, and excuse me if I'm not saying the name correctly, but Viola Liuzzo, a white Unitarian activist and mother of 5 from Detroit, was transporting a black man from Selma to the airport when she was killed by the Ku Klux Klan. Although honored at the time as a martyr, her name has almost been lost to history. One woman who simply cannot be forgotten in this list of memorable women and Unitarians is Anne Dunham, an incredible woman with many notable accomplishments in her own right. This Unitarian, who unfortunately died in 1995, did not live to learn of perhaps her greatest accomplishment. Unitarian Anne Dunham was the mother to President Barack Obama. I always get a little choked up when I say that. And last, we must honor a woman who has worked closely with many UUs over the years and was ordained a UU minister in her young adult life. Carolyn McDade has blessed us with the hymns we are singing today. Spirit of Life, Come Sing a Song with Me, and We'll Build a Land. Actually, I think all of the songs that we're hearing today have come from UU women. Am I correct? Yes. And thank you so much for doing that. From scientists to suffragists, from poets to songwriters to civil rights activists, women from the Unitarian Universalist traditions have contributed to and even changed the course of our history. As we go out today, let us remember these names and honor these contributions. And let us acknowledge, too, that we, you and I, do make a difference. Our belief in the dignity and respect of all people, our expressions of love and caring, our small acts of kindness, and our involvement in social justice causes do help to create a better world. Thank you. I do have a bit of a meditation if you'd like me to go on.
I thought I heard something about a discussion.
Okay.
You can do a meditation if you want.
I will. Let us just take a moment to reflect on these notable women who have given so much of themselves to help improve our world. And consider, too, what you have done in the span of your lifetime to bring joy and love and hope to others. Some of you have worked for social justice, or you've worked in education, or cared for the homeless, given to charitable organizations, taught a child to read, or cared for the elderly. Most of our own actions will not make the history books, or in today's world, Wikipedia. But it's in the small actions, when we show our love and kindness, that we find true change and bring true hope to humankind. Let's take just a minute to reflect. Thank you, and blessed be. discussion. So I do have these handouts for you. If you're interested, I'll put them in the back somewhere. So I think we have about 10 minutes for discussion, and maybe I should be here. I was asked to provide a couple of questions, and I think my first question would be, are there any Unitarian Universalist women in your life who have been particularly influential to you? The second question might be, do you know of other UU women who I didn't talk about today, who maybe you'd like to mention? Because there are many. I only had a few minutes to talk. So anyway, anybody have a thought on that? Yes?
I just wanted to add, one of the things that was in your script that got briefly skipped over, all of the faces in the presentations were AI generated composites of these women's faces. And she was not UU, and a lot of people don't talk about the first attempts to have a second AI go into part of a picture and like restore or fix what the first one did, which is how they make faces. But the person who came up with that system to make accurate faces in generative AIs was a woman. And just an addendum is the programming, especially a lot of deep programming, real math-heavy programming like that. There's still a good amount of misogyny in the community. A lot of people saying you're just too emotional and irrational to do this hard cognitive stuff. And that is why diversity is so absolutely necessary. Not to tick off an EEOE checkbox in your, company, but because you get stuck in a bubble that just gets worse and worse and worse if you don't have people who haven't lived your life. Mm-hmm. Making sure that you're seeing what you didn't see, because we all have blind spots. Mm-hmm. And this was a blind spot. People weren't seeing that this woman came up with a solution. And I just want to bring that up.
Well, thank you for that. You're spot on. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I have recently become aware that the Unitarian Church of the United States has been largely led by men, mm-hmm. until very recently, with the last several elected heads of the national UU being women. Mm-hmm. And it seems like, gee, that took a long time, didn't it? But we're finally there. Yeah.
I guess I'll talk about my great-grandmother.
Oh, wonderful.
She was a Unitarian. Okay.
Come over here.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Belle Stahl Mooney was my great-grandmother. She was a Unitarian. She played piano at church and helped out in the nursery. So I kind of feel, and she wrote poetry, and I write. So, I feel a connection with her. She was a doctor. At the time, she had to get I think you had to go to this homeopathic college when she was going to med school. But anyway, she became a doctor. Mostly she lectured. She wrote a book about how to talk to your kids about sex, and was working on a book about homosexuality when she died. So anyway, that is my heritage, and I do feel connected to it.
Isn't it wonderful to have people like that in your family? Yes. Yeah, that's great. Someone else have a comment? Yes?
My grandmother on my dad's side was Unitarian Universalist, and she was always very nice to us about our religious beliefs. But I was like an evangelistic Baptist kiddo growing up. That's how our family was. So we were always trying to evangelize my atheist UU grandparents. And she was just always very patient with our love of Jesus. So I appreciate it.
Good, you had that influence. I think most of our journeys possibly were a little different from each other. Yeah. So, anyone else?
Well, I was thinking, this is not connected to your questions, and I'm the one who suggested you have these questions. But anyway,
We're Unitarians.
yeah,
That's what we expect. Go for it.
Anyway, I keep thinking when when you mentioned Elizabeth,
Blackwell?
yes, I thought, how was she raised? What prepared her in life for thinking like that? Because you have to have parents who would value all of that. Do you have any idea?
I can't answer how she was raised. I think a lot of the people were Quakers. She may have come up from a Quaker family. So what I'm going to do, this is a good leads into this, good segue. What I'm going to do is have these available, so if you're interested in looking up information on any of these women or other women, you can go online and just type in their names, and there'll be a whole story. That question will be answered. I really don't know about her upbringing other than they were activists and they were liberal, and it just seems like the Unitarian movement was just ready for her. So yeah, she was quite a woman. So yes. If you go online, if you're interested at all in any of these people and their backgrounds, there are quite a number of sites online. You can just type in, notable UU women or notable UUs, and there'll be lists and lists and lists, and you can click on whoever you're interested in, and you'll be able to get lots of information. So there was a whole lot more information than I was able to include here today. So are there other questions? Okay, thank you so much. You're a wonderful audience. I really appreciate it. You're a wonderful congregation is what you are. Thank you.
And now we'll have our closing hymn, number 121, We'll Build a Land. The words will be on the screen. So please join me please stand and join me in singing We'll Build a Land. And that's it. Go ahead.
As we extinguish our chalice this morning, let us take with us the light of our history, our justice, of joy, and the light of our love for humankind. Okay? As we go out today, I'd like to leave you with the words of Abigail Scott Duniway, the author, feminist, suffragist, and active Unitarian who lived right here in the Willamette Valley. The young women of today, free to speak, to write, to study, to choose their occupation, should remember that every inch of this freedom was bought for them at a great price. It is for them to show their gratitude by helping onward the reforms of their own times, by spreading the light of freedom and of truth still wider.
So beautiful, thank you. So now we are supposed to have announcements, but I received none in the baskets, and I haven't received any up here on the podium, and so I think that's it, unless somebody has an announcement. And so we get to visit. So those of you online get to go to Zoom to join in conversation. Thank you for coming. And we people here get to have coffee and conversation right here in the sanctuary.